welcome to another edition of Amy Fisher at Large. Today, we're at the Middlesex County Museum, which is located in the historic Cornelius Lau House on River Road in Piscataway. And we're going to be talking to the curator in the house here, and then we're going to another house along River Road that's part of this historic district. Cornelius Lau was a merchant who lived here in the 1700s, and I'm going to read a little bit of this sign because I think it's fascinating. It says, "From here you can see where the village of Raritan Landing stood in the 1700s. Cornelius Lau could look out at houses, shops, warehouses, and other structures on both sides of Landing Lane. Imagine how Lau's great stone house appeared to people living below at the landing." And the Revolutionary War came through here, and all kinds of historic happenings happened along the way here. The River Road and Easton Avenue were Indian trails. So there's a lot of history around here, and we hope that you'll enjoy hearing all about it as we go into this house and talk to Hilary Murtha, the curator of exhibitions, and then go on to another historic house. Hi, Hilary. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of this beautiful house?
I'd be happy to. The house was built in 1741. It was built by Cornelius Lau, who was a Dutch merchant trader here on what was then known as the village of Raritan Landing. He traded off the wharfs out on the Raritan River. And this was a quite spectacular house for its time. He built it a little later in his career after he had settled. We see many of the original features of the home here, many of the original beautiful architectural features, with some later alterations. And also we've had the house restored within the past 5 years. We've had considerable restoration to get it back to its original state as much as possible.
Now, how many rooms were in the house originally?
Originally, there were 8 rooms. It's a typical colonial house with a center hallway, 2 rooms on either side of the hallway, upstairs and down. And there was originally also a kitchen wing on the side of the house, which was a story and a half. Unfortunately, the kitchen wing was taken down sometime in the 19th century.
Many families lived here after the Laus, I presume?
Well, you find the Poole family living here in 1795, and such alterations as were made to the house that still exist were mainly made by them, including, for example, this Greek Revival fireplace we see here. This is not original. It dates from about 1800. Subsequent to the Pooles, you get the Mettler family, who stayed here for nearly a century, the Voorhees, and finally the Strong family, who stayed here until 1979.
Is that when it became the Middlesex County Museum?
Yes, that's right. The county bought the house from the Strong family and decided to use it as a museum.
Who sponsors the museum?
The museum is sponsored by the County of Middlesex and funded by the freeholders of Middlesex County.
It's a wonderful resource. Now, you're going to be having an exhibit which opened recently, and how long will this be up, and could you tell us about it?
Sure. The exhibit opened April 14th, and it will go through May 30th, 2003. We put our exhibitions on for a full year so that the public gets as much exposure as possible. The exhibit is on architectural terracotta, which was once a very important industry here in the Middlesex County area, and it's overlooked. There are many buildings in this area that were decorated with this remarkable ceramic substance. We trace it from its origins in the 19th century. We talk about the process of manufacture. We talk about some of the really remarkable buildings, such as the Woolworth Building or the Philadelphia Museum. We also cover local history, and we'll be having educational workshops for kids in which they can actually go through the process of manufacturing this ceramic material.
That's really wonderful. You know, you had mentioned that most of the wood used in colonial times was pine, but this house has some special wood. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, in this room where we're standing right here, one of the formal rooms of the house, the wainscoting is made of cherry wood. Mr. Lau decided that he wanted something a little fancier than the common ordinary pine, which was usually painted, sometimes painted to resemble a fancier wood. He actually said he was going to have this very expensive cherry wood for this special formal parlor in his house.
That's great. What about the village of Raritan Landing? What was that like?
Well, it was quite an extensive village. It was settled in the 17th century, really took off in the early part of the 18th century, right about the time that Lau came to live here, which was 1738. And it prospered until the end of the 18th century, when there were a series of floods. There was also a fire that wiped out a number of the buildings. And at that time, New Brunswick, a little further down the river, became the main port center for this region, and the village of Raritan Landing essentially declined.
I read that River Road and Easton Avenue actually follow Lenni Lenape trails. How did you know that?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, that is true. There have been archaeologists who have done studies of this region and of the Lenni Lenape tribes in this area. And in fact, recently, at the top of what is now Mettler's Lane, a prehistoric Native American site was excavated, and remains were discovered there.
Well, that's really fascinating. So actually, people don't have to travel very far to see some really interesting history of the United States of America. So I would recommend that they come over to see you. Could you tell us what the hours are for the Middlesex County Museum?
Sure. We're open Tuesday through Friday and Sunday from 1 to 4 in the afternoon. The admission is free. We give group tours to school groups, senior centers, other organizations by appointment only. And the number to call to make an appointment for that would be 732-745-4489. And we do hope that people will come and see our current exhibit and look at the house, which is, as I say, a very special Georgian structure.
Well, we certainly recommend that they come. It's only about a 20-minute ride from East Brunswick, and there's a lot of history here. Thank you very much, Hillary, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Amy.
Now we're at another historic house. This is a private residence, and it's owned by Dr. Paul Jennings and his wife. And everyone calls you Pete, I know, so We'll call you Pete. Tell me, Pete, when did you move into this beautiful home?
1962.
And how did you manage to find it?
Well, I knew about the house because the man who owned it was the director of biological research at Rutgers, and actually was my freshman advisor when I was a student at Rutgers. So I knew that the house existed. I knew he had documented that he felt it was the oldest house in Middlesex County. And I was a practicing cardiologist, and one night I got a call from another physician asking me to come out and see Bill Cole, who was owner of this house, who was in heart failure. So I came out here about 2 or 3 in the morning and treated him. In those days, you didn't rush everybody to the hospital. And I stayed here till dawn. And at dawn, they served me breakfast. And I sat there looking over at this beautiful house and thought, wow, this is great. Well, it was a few years later that my mother was in a hairdresser. And that's where all the conversation takes place. My mother was sitting in the dryer next to the woman who owned this house, who said, Viola, I think we're going to put our house up for sale. So my mother got out from under the dryer and called me up. So I called, and we came out and saw it on Sunday and bought the house. It was as simple as that.
It is a great house. When was it first built?
Built in 1720. Dr. Cole, Bill Cole, spent many, many, many hours in the basement of the State House in Trenton looking over tax records. And he found a Matthias Smock had bought land in Piscataway in 1717, paid taxes. He had a tax bill. Paid taxes on land in 1717, 1718, and 1719, and on taxes plus a house in 1720. Okay, so that's sort of how he documented the house. He had some help from Dick McCormick, who lives up the road, who's a professor of history at Rutgers, a well-known, very well-known historian. They were good friends, and he was quite helpful in establishing the date too. So the date was pretty well established.
Now, you had said when originally this was on the property that he owned was much larger than now.
Yes, the original farm went from the Raritan River up to a brook that runs through the cemetery up by Hose Lane. And there were 3 Smock houses. They, like today, they subdivided, and each son got a piece of property. And there are 3 existing Smock houses right within probably a quarter of a mile. So we know pretty much how wide it was, and we know it was a mile long. And the original settler, Matthias Smock, came here from the New Utrecht section of Brooklyn. And that's where his father emigrated from Utrecht, Netherlands. And a group of Dutch people left New York, left Brooklyn, basically, and came over and settled in what is, when I was a kid, was known as Piscataway Town, which is out Woodbridge Avenue, part of Edison. And then they bought farmland along the Raritan River, which was fertile, and they basically lived there and commuted. And then they got smarter and decided, why not build a house? So a lot of the houses along River Road are old Dutch houses.
That's really interesting because people are still moving from Brooklyn to New Jersey right today.
Right.
Well, I think we'll go inside now and meet Mrs. Jennings.
Okay.
Well, here we are with Elise Jennings in this beautiful living room. Could you tell us about this section of your house?
Yes, we're standing in the oldest section, built in 1720. Our living room, when we bought the house, was, and I always say this, quote, was modernized to Victorian. So these walls were all had patterned wallpaper. The ceiling, the beams were covered with the ceiling, the beams not being exposed at all. There was a mantel here on this fireplace wall, and when we started restoring the house, we had a curator from the Richmond Town Restoration in Staten Island to help us with that. We certainly didn't want him, we had choices to make, and we wanted to be sure we were doing the right thing. So it was he directed us to take the ceiling down and expose the beams as you see them. Well, they weren't painted, of course, but they were painted. In fact, the colors in the room were interesting in that the colors were black, the doors, the woodwork was black, I think the ceiling was green, the beams were blue, and Mrs. Smock, who lived here, I guess those were her colors. But when Elise Jennings came and had her choice, we rearranged them.
She really was a rainbow kind of person.
Well, truly, if this were a museum, just as it is at Bucklew Mansion, just across the river, if you're a purist, you leave things. You get down to the original paint, and you leave things as you find them.
But you don't, you live
No,
here.
but living
so
here, you do, you.
Those
you have the
original
privilege.
colors were based on what they could use, such as charcoal for black and mustard for yellow. And, I mean, they didn't have the pigments that we have today, so they had to use natural substances.
You uncovered something very interesting when you were doing the restoration about the construction of this section of the house.
Well, in the other room, we have a section cut out, which we left and put a little window in it, which shows that the walls of this part of the house are made of mud. And they packed the mud against the clapboards. And it's marvelous insulation. And
Mud and straw from the riverbed,
yeah,
we were
they
told.
apparently
Yeah.
took grass and mud and from marsh across the way along the river and just packed it in. And people will come here on a hot day and think we have air conditioning, and really it's just this great insulation.
Well, also, I want to talk a little bit about this beautiful painting that you have. Who is the woman in this picture?
This woman's my great-grandmother, and I remember her when I was a child. Her husband fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, survived, and she was so excited about the Civil War that she went down early in the morning to watch Lincoln's casket go from through the Pennsylvania Railroad Station in Philadelphia. And so I say that it shows how old I am or how young the country is. It shows that just in a few generations can span all the way back to before Lincoln.
That's truly amazing. Well, I think we'll move on to your dining room now, okay? All right, well, now we're in the dining room, and you have this beautiful corner cupboard. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, this corner cupboard was actually built in. When we moved in, it was up against the ceiling, it was up on a board underneath it. And an antique dealer happened to be delivering some furniture, and he commented, "That's a nice early American cupboard you have. Someday it would be nice to take it down and refinish it, and you'd have a nice early cupboard."
It was also painted white. It was,
Yeah, it was
all painted white.
So he did that. He took it down. He restored the doors, and he made a beautiful piece of furniture, which we thought was basically a built-in cupboard.
At least this part of the house was built slightly later than the original. Could you tell us about that?
Mm-hmm. We were told that this addition was built in the late 1700s. And again, the ceiling was plastered, and we'd hoped that when we took this ceiling down that we would find beams as we had in the earlier portion of the house. But we did not find that. And so then, again, I asked the curator, well, then, do you think then this is a much later addition than we were told? He said no, because when he saw the lath that was up there, the lath and plaster, he could tell by saw marks that they was very early. He says, no, as early as the late 1700s, they did have lath and plaster, and I do believe that. This wall had a mantel on it, without a fireplace, just the mantel, which they did in those days. They did it simply as a decorative kind of thing. And so, again, when we took it away, the curator said, yes, that's much later, you should discard that. This wall was behind the plaster, and we were going to replaster it, but we liked the way it looked. It gave it an interest to the room, and we left it just as it was.
Actually, with pine, very much like the floor, and we thought originally we might just refinish it, but that wasn't feasible because the lath marks were still visible, so we ended up painting it, which I think, in retrospect, was a better thing to do anyway.
Tell us about the floor.
The floor, this floors in this room were as they are now. The floors in the living room were covered with narrow floorboards, which we took up and found the old floors underneath in both the library and the living room.
And you can tell us about this painting.
Well, this is the daughter of the woman in the painting in the other room, and she was born in Philadelphia and lived in Highland Park. And again, she lived into her 70s. So.
And Elise, you have this magnificent piece of furniture in this room. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, well, that's a Queen Anne highboy. Pete and I had gone to an auction in Maine for no particular reason, just for interest, and we came away. The auction went on, and the price was so good. I kept nudging Pete, and I said, "Well, let's just go a little higher." And actually, we came home with a prize, and it's in two parts, so that we had to take 2 trips from Maine. We brought it home in our station wagon, and so we were delighted. That's one of our real treasures.
That is the most beautiful piece of furniture I've ever seen anywhere outside of a museum. All right, Pete, you have a story about your kitchen fireplace that I think is interesting.
Well, the fireplace was, when we moved in, it was an oil burner, and that used that flue, so we could not use that fireplace. The previous owner apparently had turned the fireplace around from the dining room to the kitchen. And when we had the electric heat put in and our oil burner taken out, we had a chimney sweep come in to look at it. Well, he actually was a man who did this sort of as a hobby. He was very well educated, and I believe had a master's degree, not in chimney sweeping, in education. And he pointed out, he actually stood up in that fireplace and found there was a hole which was patched up, showing that there was probably originally after the fireplace in this room, there was a stove, a Franklin stove, so that we know that Franklin stove heated this room after the fireplace.
And you still use the fireplace?
We still use the fireplace. We use all 3 fireplaces.
Well, Pete, this is very interesting information that you have on your wall here. It's from many years ago. Could you tell us about that?
This is a copy of reparations lists, and the previous owner found this when he's researching the house. And these are the 3 smock houses in Piscataway, and a list of the articles that were destroyed by the British during the Revolutionary War, and they applied in 1782 to get reparation, which to date have never been paid. I keep hoping that I'll get a check from Queen Elizabeth one day with this plus interest, but so far it hasn't happened.
That's really fascinating. And the list is very extensive.
Well, it's quite interesting because it shows the relative value of things back in those days. And one of the most expensive items was a able-bodied Negro male, age 29, who was obviously a slave, who was worth 50 pounds, as compared to sheep and goats and cattle and silver knee breeches, buckle, and things of that nature. And so it's sort of interesting to compare the prices.
I'm just reading here. You have 22 sheep, 4 barrels of cider, and 4 barrels of apples, 15 pounds.
Right. And it's in pound shillings and pence. So I have no idea what a pound was worth in 1782.
I guess not. Pete, now we're upstairs in the original part of the house, the earliest part of the house. What is in this section?
Well, there are 3 bedrooms and a bath, and this hall. That's what it amounted to. But in the early days, up till actually the mid-20s, this was just one big loft, and I guess they all slept up here, and the heat from the fireplace downstairs kept it warm up here.
Now, Messiah Smock, how many children did he have?
8 children.
So it was pretty crowded.
Yeah, it was quite crowded, I guess.
When was the house first sold outside of the Smock family?
Well, it was inherited for generations. Actually, again, Bill Cole, the owner we bought the house from, did all the research and has a list of all the owners. And it wasn't until 1913 that it exchanged hands by sale. Up till then, it was by inheritance. And the Smocks and the Nevius family, which is an old New Brunswick name, and again a Dutch name. And then finally, I think it was 1913, a family named Patterson bought the house. And then since then, it's been sold 3 or 4 times.
Well, actually, not too many families have lived here.
No, I guess. Do you know how many?
Only 12 families have ever lived in this house.
That's quite amazing. In the corner, you have a very interesting artifact. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, in the corner we have an early wig stand. Not early, it was meaning it was original to our house. We were told when we bought it that Matthias Mock belonged to the original owner, and we, with one owner had and another, would have an agreement, simply a gentleman's agreement, that it was to remain in the house always. So it's the only original thing that we have here. Everything else is, we added, of course. The wig itself is simply a theatrical wig. And of course, when youngsters come through our house, friends of our children and now grandchildren, they love it. I said, well, you can put it on if you like. It's not an artifact in itself, no.
That is amazing. And tell us a little bit about your bed.
Oh, yes. We have a four-poster bed and in the master bedroom. And way back, I don't remember what time it was in our life, but I had seen it and told Pete I'd been to an antiques dealer that we knew well, and I said, oh, Mr. Hockenberry has this wonderful four-poster bed. I said, I wish you'd look at it. And Pete was busy working at the time, of course, and he said, well, yes, I'd love to. I'll get there. Well, a month went by and 6 weeks went by, and I said, oh, I'll have to call Mr. Hockenberry and tell him he's holding it for us for you to see. Well, one day, very soon after I'd said that, a knock came at the door, and there was Mr. Hockenberry with the bed on my birthday, saying, I have a present for you from Pete.
That is truly wonderful. This house is so full of stories. I think we could spend 3 days here and not get through them all, but unfortunately, we're limited in time, and I just want to thank you so much for letting us come. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful time with you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I've gotten all kinds of polishing done in preparation.
Well, you know, when you own an old house, you really feel it belongs to the public, and you have to be very proud to show it, and it represents almost 300 years of history.
What's amazing is that not only is it historic, but it looks so comfortable.
Yes, that's other people always when you say you live in a house built in 1720, they picture you sleeping on the floor and being very uncomfortable. It's not uncomfortable at all. It's a very comfortable house.
The nicest compliment that anyone could give us, and they'll say, well, you know, your house is so warm and comfortable and cozy. As Pete has said, when you live in an historic house, you feel a tremendous obligation to care for it, take care of it for your lifetime, to preserve it for the many generations who come after you.
Well, you have done a wonderful job, and thank you again.
Uh-huh.